On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, Evergreen sued. Welcome to What's Going On with Shipping. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. So, if you are an old hand at this channel, you know this channel's connection with the motor vessel Evergreen. If you're new to the channel, perhaps you don't know, but this channel started back in March of 2021 with the grounding of the motor vessel Evergreen. In the Suez, I was asked to do several news shows and didn't get an opportunity really to go in depth that I wanted to talk about motor vessel Evergreen. So we started a channel, and it was initially called What's Going On in the Suez. Obviously, once Evergreen got out of the Suez, which was 100 days, we morphed it into What's Going On with Shipping, and here we are today. But Evergreen is back in the news again. And obviously, I could not resist an opportunity to go back and revisit our favorite ship on this channel. So if you're new to the channel, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. All right, let's talk about our old girl. There she is, Evergreen in the Suez, the famous image of her sideways in the Suez. This was taken from the motor vessel Maersk Denver, just astern of her. She was heading northbound in the Suez on March 23rd, 2021, when she lost control. Her bow plowed into Asia, and her stern was up in Africa, and she straddled the canal. This image, probably a little bit more famous, it was actually taken from the International Space Station, believe it or not. And I did a ton of videos on her. I have a whole playlist on this channel that you can go back and look at. Obviously, the most famous one I did was the damage of Evergreen revealed, but a whole variety of different videos were given on this. And again, it tracks the whole sordid story of Evergreen. But the one I want to highlight is this one right here, the Evergreen grounding 2D, 3D. Did a video thanks to some great data that was put up on YouTube that showed a two-dimensional, three-dimensional drawing of Evergreen using AIS data going through the Suez. And we talked about what specifically happened to her, and that's the key thing here in a new court case being leveled by several companies who had cargo on board Evergreen and are suing the ownership of Evergreen, the company in charge, for damages. Evergreen is out and about. Matter of fact, she just cleared the northern Straits of Malacca. She's in the Indian Ocean and heading for the Suez right now. She is scheduled to do a northbound transit of the Suez in early October, get through the canal without any problems. So this is the story today that got my interest going on this. This is from Sam Chambers. Sam over at Splash 24/7 put this up, actually sent me a note saying he knew I would enjoy this story, and I do. Evergreen owners back in court defending ship's erratic passage through the Suez. All right. So we all know about Evergreen and its passage. Just recap that here. Well, a group of cargo owners and their insurers are suing the ship's owner, Japan's Shoei Kisen Kaisha, at a court in London over the accident. Now, they're doing it in London because that's where the P&I, the Protection and Indemnity Insurance, was held. The UK P&I Club holds the insurance for the cargo that was on this vessel. Jump ahead here. The latest court case has been brought by a group of companies. You can see them all right there. Much of the claims relate to food, which was spoiled by the time they reached their destination many months later than planned. So the ship was grounded for 6 days, but it was then subsequently arrested by the Egyptian government and held for over 100 days. So it was about 4 months before the cargo that was destined for the ports of Rotterdam, Felixstowe, and Hamburg, although she never went into Hamburg. The shippers and their insurers claims that the grounding happened thanks to the decision to speed through the canal and the failure to stick to the deepest central part of the waterway, which is the canal. I mean, there's not a lot of room in the canal here. It's again, you saw the width of the canal here in the pictures. It's not like there's a lot of room there. The cargo owners told the high court the ship owners, quote, were negligent and or failed to act with reasonable care and skill in the breach of the duty. The court papers filed in London allege that the master of the ship, which was managed by Bernhard Schultz Ship Management, which is a German company that employed Indian crew members on a Japanese-owned vessel with a Panamanian registry. This is the world of international shipping, people. Was sailing for 18 minutes above the 12-knot speed limit, at which point the ship lost control, veered from side to side before grounding, and its bow firmly lodged in one of the banks of the canal, blocking intercontinental trade for close to a week and creating the most high-profile shipping accident this century. Previous court cases have heaped significant criticism on the 2 pilots on board. Okay, so go back to that video, and I'll have the video linked to this one. You can go watch it. Ever Given got into the canal and suffered high winds. There were high winds going on, but there was a ship the same size of it just forward of it, the Costco Galaxy. But what happened was the ship never quite got itself centered in the canal. And as the ship kind of pendulated from bank to bank, decision was made to speed up, and the vessel continually sped up. And when you speed up a vessel the size of Ever Given, you get more control over the rudder, which is great. That's what you want. But it also means there's less to control the vessel should something go wrong, and something did go wrong. The correct choice here would have been to slow down, and at worst, the ship gets pushed up against the bank, call in tugs. That's not what happened. The ship entered the canal on March 23rd in stormy conditions with strong winds. A seafarer who was on a ship further ahead in the convoy told Splash that he experienced gusts of wind that day up to 50 knots. Now, Ever Given is a huge vessel. I mean, tremendous in size, over 1,000 feet long. Plus, with its wind surface area from the containers, it's going to go all over the place. A few kilometers into Ever Given's transit, placed 13th in the 20-ship convoy, the 400-meter-long ship, it's 1,300 feet, veered from port to starboard back in response. According to court documents from a hearing in Egypt in June last year, the lead Suez Canal Authority pilot instructed the helmsman to steer right, a hard right, then hard left. Ever Given's vast hull took so long to respond that by the time it began to move, the helmsman needed to correct course again. All right, so there's a lot of debate here in this case between who's at fault here. Is it the pilot, or is it the basically the master of the vessel? Master of the vessel is ultimately responsible for a ship. So the master, the Indian captain on board, is ultimately responsible. However, the pilots are supposed to provide that expertise. But the master, should the vessel be getting into extremis, pull control back. And this is the argument that's going on here. Even though the 2 pilots were on board and they were fighting with each other based on the court documents that we know that basically the ship was in a lot of trouble. It goes on here. The increase in power created unforeseen problems in the shape of what is known as Bernoulli's principle, whereby fluid pressure goes down when its speed goes up. So this vessel was, the way it works is the ship gets closer to the bank, the bow pushes off because it's pushing water out of the way, but the stern wants to suck in, and because of the huge size of the vessel, it begins to squat, sink lower in the water. You have all these effects on here. And all of this led to the accident, with the pilots blaming the ship. Hey, the ship wasn't responsive enough. It was problems with the helmsman and the rudder. And the ship saying, no, it was the pilot's fault. It's a mess. It's a mess. But this case, specifically in London now, is by these food companies leveling against Ever Given's insurance company, the UK P&I Club, for restitution for the vessel losing its cargo. And I'll have a link to the full story in here. So Ever Given and the Ever Gs, the 11 vessels in here, are really interesting vessels. So this is a story that was published back in 2015 by Mike Scholler over at G-Captain, talking about the construction of these vessels. The fact that Japanese shipbuilder Imbari Shipbuilding had secured new building contracts for 11 container ships with a TEU capacity of 20,000 TEU. This is back in 2015. This is a huge order. These are huge vessels today, but back then it was marked. Marks the first order for container ships of 20,000 TEUs. At the time, the largest container ship had a little over 19,000. That was the Mediterranean Shipping Company ship, the Oscar. And so this contract was really significant over the time. Now, Imbari had built over 200 container ships at this time, but nothing this big. And what's really interesting here is the second paragraph. Imbari said it secured the order with the cooperation of the Marubeni Corporation, although did not specify which carrier placed the order, only revealing that it was an overseas ship owner. Well, the owner was with Evergreen, obviously. Evergreen was the company that wanted these vessels. And this is the stats here for Ever G-class container ship. Imbari built 13 of these, 11 of them for Evergreen and 2 others for another company. But they're absolutely massive in size. You see here, 400 meters, 58.8 meter beam, 16 meter draft. That's over 50 feet in draft here. But what's interesting about these vessels is that the ships weren't built for Evergreen. As you come down here and you look at the ship list, here's the list of the 11 vessels from Ever Golden all the way down to Ever Great. All of them were built for Shoei, Kisen, Kaisha. That is the owner of it. Shoei, Kisen, Kaisha is a subsidiary of Imbari. The shipyard that built the vessels owned the vessels, and they in turn then leased them to Evergreen or other companies that in turn lease vessels to Evergreen. You may be aware when you go on airline flights, sometimes you'll go on a national airline, American, US Air, one of the big airlines, Delta, and you would see that it's actually, it may say Delta on the side, but it's operated by a subsidiary. That also happens here in shipping, and it does that a lot to kind of mask ownership and charter rates. There's a whole variety of reasons for this. But what's really interesting is the fact that this ship is owned by the shipyard that built it. Now, this is Imbari Shipyard. This is their website. And what's really interesting is it's a huge shipyard in Imbari. Imbari is massive. If you look at their shipbuilding bases in Japan, they have multiple sites. They even have one overseas in Piraeus. But when you look at their offices, they have their headquarters in Imbari, but then they have multiple shipyards all scattered around Japan. I mean, this is a massive, large corporation that builds everything from bulk carriers to tankers to container ships. Here you'll see exactly what they're building here. What's really interesting is the amount that they build, not just as part of Japan's shipbuilding. They build 34.6% of all the ships in Japan. And Japan's one of the 3 largest shipbuilders in the world, the others being Korea and China. But when you look at Imbari in terms of world population, Japan builds 18% of the world fleet. Imbari by itself builds over 6% of the world's fleet. And again, these variety of different ships, from bulk carriers, container ships, tankers, chip carriers, LNGs, car carriers, and pure car and truck carriers, what are roll-on, roll-off vessels. The company's been around a long time. If you look at the history of the company, it goes back to 1901. Is when the company is founded. They have a great timeline here that shows you the history of the company, what exists. A little gray in the area of World War II. You don't see a lot about Imbari during World War II. Not sure why the Japanese wouldn't include that. Strange, in my opinion. But really a massive history of a company, just really impressive. I mean, you're talking about a 121-year history of a shipbuilding company that has built a wide variety of vessels. But what's really interesting is how they diversified their company. And the fact that they are building ships that they own and then lease is an interesting arrangement. Because if you think about that, you're building a ship for yourself. Are you going to charge yourself a huge amount of money, for example, in profits? You can actually build a ship for a loss. If you're in Bari, build the ship for a loss. You're not making money on it at all, but you know you're going to make money on it through ship leases to companies over the span of the lifetime. This is a very innovative way that Japan builds vessels and are able to compete on the global marketplace. They're building vessels, and in some cases where they're building a large class of vessels for some shipyard or for some ship companies, they won't own all of them, but they may own 2 or 3 of them. And that's how they get some of the money and how they can build ships for just a competitive price. Here's the site here for Shoei Kisen Kaisha, the company that owns the vessel. Again, a really interesting company. You can follow it and take a look at it. I'll, of course, have the link in here for them with their company profile, how they operate ships. I pulled up their company profile right here. It is an interesting company because, for example, they don't have that much capital. I mean, 60 million yen is not a lot of money. I think it's about $400 million. $400,000. It's not that much. The yen to US dollar isn't a lot. But their total sales, over 100 billion yen per year. Again, it's a fraction of that based on their elements. But their major shipyard here is in Bari. But if you look at who they build ships for, they're building them for NYK, Mitsubishi OSK lines, the K line, that is all ONE now. The Ocean Network Express, those 3 companies have been merged together into the Ocean Network Express. Maersk, Evergreen, Navos, Ultranav, Norden, a whole batch of companies. Imbari building these ships, and then they create this ownership company, Shoei, Kisen, and Kaisha, that operates the vessel. And now you have a court case involving food shippers who had cargo on board. Ever Given are now suing in London through the UK P&I Club to get restitution for their cargo. Man, this is a perfect example of why international shipping is so complex, because of the multiple layers and issues you have involved in here. It's estimated there's about $2 billion worth of lawsuits being leveled against Ever Given for the accident in the Suez, and that's on top of what you saw happen with the Egyptian government. You got to think there were 400 ships that were delayed because of Ever Given. So it's not just a delay of the cargo that's on Ever Given, but the delay on ships that had to wait to get through the Suez Canal for weeks at a time till it could clear. It took about 2 weeks to clear the backlog of the Suez. So any ship that had cargo on board that was delayed as a result of this could conceivably log a dispute against the UK P&I Club that has the insurance for this and try to get restitution. It is a mess of a case, and we knew Ever Given would be going on for a long time. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope you learned a little bit about ocean shipping. It's complex. It's not easy. If you did enjoy this, take a minute, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, give it a thumbs up, and if you can, support the page. You can do that one of two ways. One, hit the super thanks button below, contribute directly to the page, or you head on over to Patreon. I'll have the link in the show notes at the end of the video so you become a patron of the page and contribute to the page. So until our next video, this is Al, signing off.